So we've been reviewing various mechs. I've been pushing up various Battletech, Tactica, and ways that I've explored using light, medium, heavy, and assault mechs in the game, pushing that up to the channel. Talking about various tanks. I love mechs, but I also really love tanks. We've been talking about the values of infantry. We've been looking at air support. We've even touched briefly on artillery, and we're going to talk about artillery more in a little bit. But in this podcast and the next couple of podcasts, I want to push up there to explore various tactics and kind of expand things out. Support pieces in the game. Various vehicles and units that, while they don't have necessarily a damage output as their primary attribute, they are there as force magnifiers. They are there as opportunities on the game table to give you an edge. Two great examples, and of course we're going to look at the primary example, mobile command center. Coolant trucks, these pieces that are out there, which if you're a completionist, you're going to expand them into your collection, but how do we begin to approach them? So essentially, the idea of a coolant truck, it's like the reverse of, well, I was going to say it's the reverse of a fire truck, but I guess that's the whole idea of a fire truck. Essentially, a coolant truck is there to spray down and hook up to a mech to quickly flush the heat. And in the technical manuals and technical readout, it talks about kind of this crew that in the game they're assigned to cool down mechs that have shut down or deal with hazardous situations involving a mech. There's a couple of miniatures by Iron Wind that are out there. But on a side note, what you'll find with a lot of these support models, it's very easy to pull in models from other miniature war games and other ranges to give your forces a kind of a different look, a different feel. There's a lot of creativity you can get involved with. So heat is very, very important in the game. Let's look at two mechs that are very, very easy to generate heat with, and in many ways, heat does limit them. I'm thinking the Stalker. Stalker has redundant weapons profiles for every bracket. Long range, medium range, and short range on there. But you can't fire everything all the time. Another example would be the Awesome. And I say the Awesome versus other mechs that have dual, or in the case of the Awesome, triple PPCs, simply because a Marauder and a Warhammer, they're going to fire off the PPCs, but they have other weapon systems to augment it or to play with the various ranges. The Awesome just has the 3 PPCs. That's it on there. So you really need to manage heat. So two great examples of mechs that have the staying power, have the firing power, and are amazing machines in themselves. But now imagine if you did not have to worry about heat. So if we look at the battle value of these support trucks, they're not overly high. They're up there with the Warrior helicopter and other support assets. 300, 400, 500 battle value, where even if you're playing a smaller battle value game, 3,000 or 4,000 points on there, it's not going to break the bank. And certainly if you're playing a much larger game where you've got 8, 6, 7, 8, 12,000 battle value, taking a few of these support pieces is going to give you an extra tactical push. I find with the coolant trucks, if you're going to utilize them, 100% they need to be in a defensive role, because the idea that you're going to have this vehicle keep up with the other mechs in your forces. So if I'm going to run a coolant truck and I'm going to literally have it driving next to the Awesome, that's not practical, because now as my opponent begins to, because it's a wheeled vehicle, it's not a tracked vehicle, so it's going to take increased motive hits on there. Often you're not even going to have to worry about it, because if your opponent shoots at it with pretty much anything, it's just going to go down and explode. But for whatever reason, if they're not going to do that, then certainly having a mech being able to redeploy in various places and move through terrain, depending on what you're playing on, unless it's just open hex map on there, it's going to be challenging to keep up. It's going to be challenging to navigate and maneuver. So with that, it switches to a defensive role where if you were in a fortified position, and fortified position might be literally a base. It might be a bunker. It might be some ruins. A fortified position might be, look, I'm going to be static, and I'm just going to kind of sit there in a forest and put the coolant truck there, drive it up, and park it. That is where it begins to shine. When you can hook it up into a static, defendable position, now you're increasing the fire output of the mech every single turn. A good combo, and yes, I'm a longbow fanboy on there. Longbow can consistently fire lots and lots of missiles, but it does begin to deal with heat where you can't shoot every single turn. The longbow has kind of the triple threat of, if we're going to look at what we're going to hook a coolant truck up to, it has the triple threat of being able to reach inner sphere maximum range with the LRMs. It has the ability to fire indirect. It also has the ability, based on the long-range 20 packs, of having a decent spread, possibly critting certain areas and putting out a decent amount of damage, along with redundancy too. I'm going to fire the 5 packs. I'm going to fire the 20 packs on there. You hook that truck up, that thing is firing every single turn with no regard to heat. It's essentially, imagine placing down the longbow and placing the coolant truck there, and now drawing a radius around it of hexes. That is the threat zone, whether you can see your opponent or not. Now, you might need a spotter for indirect, but that's easy to acquire in other areas on there. In a defensive role, it really, really shines because I don't have to worry about it keeping up. Furthermore, depending on just how defensive and the terrain, you might be able to hide it. You might be able to keep it out of sight. You might be able to keep it in cover on there. But from an opposing standpoint, realize as we move into range, so if I was able to get a mech, and the mech, it could be something like a Shadowhawk. It could be a medium mech moving in there. When I move to engage, I'm not going to go after that longbow. I will go after the coolant truck, and I will try to destroy it because that will take away a pretty sizable advantage, a decent advantage, a 1-to-1, meaning that coolant truck is only going to service one mech. You park it and hook it onto the appropriate mech. That is a huge buff. That is a huge, huge boost on there. If I can easily take it out, I will. So now we get into kind of the reverse tactica. If I hook up a coolant truck to the right mech and you go after that mech, do I have something in my list that can go after what you're sending to come after me on there? It creates this back and forth, possibly setting a little bit of a trap on there. So things to consider, and that's how we begin to approach these support vehicles, because certainly it's a low enough battle value. Certainly it takes the total warfare and pushes it out there and makes the game more interesting. But not even like the Firestarter, the Vulcan, the Urban Mech. These are mechs that are specifically designed for very, very narrow and very, very focused roles on the table. But they're still mechs. These vehicles are vehicles or hover. They're support. But everything needs to align. And when they do, they give it a little bit of a buff, but they make a very, very tempting target on the table.